Welcome back to the Telco Drift. I am Pablo, and most of the time I'm spending it as an analyst, but I'm also trying to make it as a podcaster. And today's episode, I'm quite excited to be joined by Manish Tiwari, head of enterprise for Ericsson, to chat about what is happening in the market and what will happen in 2026. So, Manish, welcome to the Telco Drift.
Thank you, Pablo. Pleasure to be here.
So before talking, enterprise 5G, private networks, and all that good stuff, can you tell us a little bit more of, how did you end up head of enterprise 5G at Ericsson? Sort of what's your story so far?
Sure. Pablo, I have been in the enterprise networking space for about 25 years. I started my career, during the heydays of the internet when the core internet infrastructure was getting built in the late 90s and early 2000s. And then after a few years of doing that, I went into Wi-Fi. At the time when Wi-Fi chips were not there yet in the laptops. We were still using dongles. There were no Wi-Fi networks in any of the enterprises, and we were just starting to see employees bring rogue access points from their homes into offices, and enterprises getting concerned by the security threat imposed by Wi-Fi on their networks. So I've spent a long time in Wi-Fi from 2002 to almost 2019, 2020 timeframe. That's when I was at Aruba for a few years. Then we got acquired by HPE. I was with HPE for a part of the networking business group for a few years. And then I left in 2020 and came into the cellular sort of world. I joined a company called Cradlepoint, ran their strategy and corp dev. Cradlepoint got acquired by Ericsson in late 2020. And eventually, there was a business unit formed inside Ericsson called Enterprise Wireless Solutions. This business unit has the sole mission to take cellular technologies and make them pervasive in enterprise environments. So for the past few years, that's what I've been doing, and I'm responsible for our business line called Enterprise 5G, which includes our private networking portfolio, our neutral host portfolio, and the adjacent technologies that go with that.
Amazing. You're definitely the right person to, ask what's going to happen next year. But I just want to very quickly touch on a point that you mentioned. So you started talking about Wi-Fi and how that technology evolved with, being added to computer and auto device. And I think that is quite relevant because when I talk to a lot of people, it seems that for them Wi-Fi has always been there, right? Because when I'm telling them, it takes time for private cellular, to get where Wi-Fi is because Wi-Fi has already spent, years and years of kind of building the ecosystem. It wasn't created from day zero, right? So it's
Yes,
always going to take a bit of time.
yes. No, actually, it's very interesting because these days we take for granted the availability of Wi-Fi everywhere we go, whether it's an airport or a hotel or even our own homes and so on. And the reality is, there was a time, in fact, there were a few years from, I would say, 2001 to 2008 timeframe, where for those of us who used to be in the Wi-Fi industry, we used to wonder what is the killer app for Wi-Fi and when are we going to see the scale and when are we going to see enterprises deploy this? Because we were building a lot of technology, but the customers were using this more as something to show off to their customers, right? So they would deploy it in their EBCs, in their executive briefing centers. They would deploy it in their reception area, but they would definitely not deploy it everywhere where their employees were. Uh, the device ecosystem was still immature at that time. The chipset prices were still high. So that journey that Wi-Fi went through from 2001 to 2007, 2008 is something that people don't remember now. But there was a time where Wi-Fi was not pervasive, and it took some time for the device ecosystem to catch up and for that technology to become pervasive as well.
It's a beautiful deja vu happening, with other markets as well. So the good
Exactly.
news is that at the end of the day, it made it, and I'm optimistic on private cellular as well. But okay, if we're thinking out, so 2025 has been a crazy year for private 5G for multiple reasons. There's been like a lot of drama. Let's let's leave it like that. But I'm
Yeah.
curious from your end, how have you seen the market? Are we going in the right direction? Are you guys happy with what you're seeing? Would you like to see more maybe from partners or other parts of the ecosystem?
Yeah. So I think the way I think about this is If you look at the journey, let's take a time frame of about 3 years. What has changed in the last 3 years? Uh, and we can almost divide our prospective customers or the kind of enterprises that are using private 5G into three different personas. So one persona would be the kind of enterprises that operate in environments that require a pretty broad coverage. So these would be oil and gas customers, these would be wind farms, these would be outdoor environments where there is a need for a large geographical area to have some sort of connectivity. And this set of enterprises were using a private network even during the 4G days, right? There used to be 4G deployments, and the basic problem statement was I need some sort of connectivity that is reliable and that can allow my devices that don't consume a lot of bandwidth. They are sensors, they are meters, and things like that. But I need some network to be able to offer that connectivity. So that's sort of your first segment of enterprises. They continue to exist. Those deployments continue to scale. From 4G to 5G, there are migrations happening. People who started on 5G, they are upgrading to 5. The people who started on 4G are upgrading to 5G, and so on. Then we have a second set of enterprises who have new use cases, and these new use cases have continued to mature over the past few years. So this advancement of enterprise use cases is pretty interesting to see. So first of all, for example, as tracking, location, autonomous control, and computer vision technologies have matured, so have the enterprise use cases that are taking advantage of these underlying technologies. So we started to see wide area coverage getting combined with autonomous control in mining, so remotely operated vehicles due to worker safety concerns in hazardous environments. We started to see ports embrace AI for remote inspection to detect errors and faults in operations. So video cameras starting to upload a lot of video, and then AI algorithms trying to automatically detect faults in operations or workers not wearing a safety vest. In railways, we started to see robots being deployed to do visual inspection for predictive maintenance and auto detection of faults and maintenance issues. So there are these kind of use cases that started coming up. And then we started to see AGVs come into the scene, right? So mobile HMI, smart tools, mobile surveillance in manufacturing environments. Data showering started to appear. So a lot of cars have a lot of software these days, and that software needs to be downloaded on the manufacturing line pretty fast on a number of cars, because the cycle time of the manufacturing of a vehicle depends on how fast you can make that download happen. So what was a simple use case for maybe scanners in a warehouse could be combined with all of these new applications, and all of a sudden the justification for private 5G becomes much clearer, and the aggregate value of the use cases increases significantly. So this is sort of the journey that the industry has been on in the last 3 years, where 3 years ago we were seeing people experiment with advanced use cases that 5G could enable. But now, if we look at the deployments, then it is pretty prevalent that every deployment that is in production has a combination of these use cases that are enabled by these underlying technologies that got developed in the last 5 years.
That's fascinating because sort of in my other life as an analyst, working for Omdia, we've had a lot of conversation. We've done a lot of research, and what you're mentioning about, you're effectively you're putting use case on top of each other, right? One use case, it may be sort of a tough conversation, but once you have like two, three use cases that are all supported by the same network, then why you need the network becomes a much easier conversation, right? Because like, okay, you have multiple benefits potentially across different departments as well, and that makes life much easier. So again, it seems so the whole market has been evolved, right? From the pure coverage play, sort of basic, can call it like connectivity and IoT, to advanced IoT, industrial IoT type of scenarios, which I think is encouraging, right? Because that's the problem that enterprises have nowadays. But if we then look at 2026, how do you expect things to change? Do you see more of the same, an acceleration? Do you think maybe 6G will start, being discussed as technology?
Yeah. I think in the macro network world, of course, conversations on 6G are going to start. But from an enterprise standpoint, I think we still have a lot of work to do to make these enterprise networks scale globally, as well as for enterprises to embrace 5G at a much bigger scale. It is happening. It has been going on for the past 3 4 years, but there is significant road in front of us for that scale to happen. Now, I was in my earlier answer, I was talking about these three different personas of enterprises that are sort of embracing private 5G. I talked about the first and the second. There is also a third one, which is enterprises who have a Wi Fi network in place. They don't necessarily have new advanced use cases for 5G, but they look at private networks and private 5G as an opportunity to make their Wi-Fi network more robust and stable. And they, to I mean, maybe they have some coverage holes that they want to fill with private 5G, or they are tired of the hardware refreshes that they have to do on Wi-Fi networks every 3 to 4 years. So we have had enterprises come to us and say that, hey, can you guys sort of help me with not having to do these hardware refreshes that I have to do every 3 4 years? And if you look at the Wi-Fi business for the past 25 years, that's what it has been. Every 3 4 years, there
Mhm.
is a new standard. Then we go to every
Yeah.
university and say, hey, you have students coming with new laptops that will support these new standards. Why do you have an obsolete network that doesn't support those laptops? So that's the journey that that industry goes through every 3 4 years. And one of the interesting things about cellular and about 5G is that it's a technology that has a much longer time span compared to Wi-Fi. So that is sort of the third person of customers that we see. They say that, hey, if you can help me avoid these hardware refreshes that I'm having to do many times, that would be awesome. So now let's talk about 2026 a little bit. So as I was saying, that we are still relatively early in the journey for enterprises to embrace cellular as a core part of their network. There are a lot of interesting things happening and will continue to happen in 26 and 27. So one of the things that is continuing to happen is robotics. Either it is humanoid robots, or it is video cameras that are increasingly being used with sophisticated AI algorithms to do predictive maintenance and things like that. That I think will continue to increase significantly. We have several new devices coming up from both the companies that are making these robots, as well as the companies that make consumer devices getting launched next year and the year after that. So that will see. Will that be an iPhone moment for private 5G? We don't know, but we can, I think, safely predict that the amount of traffic and the number of devices getting connected to private 5G networks will continue to increase. And the interesting part about these robots is that not only do they require a very predictive network to perform, but if they stop, then the cost of outage for the customers is very, very high.
Yeah.
And that's a very interesting characteristic that we do see as a theme across multiple verticals, that customers deploy private 5G, and the customers who have the successful deployments are those who have very seriously thought about their 3 to 5 use cases that they want to start with, and they have done the analysis on the ROI impact of these 3 to 5 use cases. And 1 year later, after deployment, if they have solved those 3 to 5 use cases, then suddenly the whole investment thesis makes a lot of sense, and they continue to scale and go globally. So with these robots coming into in industrial environments, I think we will see it becoming more clearer that there is a value in having a network that can support deterministic performance at the RF layer,
Mhm.
that can support low latency use cases, and that can support high mobility when things move from one direction to another. So that's a significant new area that I see improving. The second area that I see is I don't see private 5G in isolation. I think you were talking about this earlier, that we will have different flavors of wireless technologies in the enterprise. We will have Wi-Fi, we will have private 5G, we will also have public 5G, because there are a lot of enterprises who do have a significant indoor coverage problem. And in fact, what we see in majority of our largest customers is the conversation either starts from, I have an indoor coverage problem because my employees and contractors and guests are not able to get any signal from the macro network in my warehouse or factory or office buildings and so on. So I need to solve that. And when we go about solving it, it automatically they automatically discover new use cases that are better solved on a private 5G network. So it's either that customer journey, or it happens in the other direction as well, that we deploy a private 5G network, and during that time the customer realizes that, hey, I have, and one of our customers has more than 20,000 employees and contractors and guests that enter their single facility every day, and not having a public network access in that building is a significant liability for that customer. So they would rather have both private 5G and public 5G, or a neutral host network to solve that problem and get remove the liability associated with it. So we see
And
all of these things coming together as a trend in 2026 and beyond. And I think where this will my hope is that where this will go is, uh, the network will become smart enough and intelligent enough to realize which application should run on which of these flavors of either 5G or Wi-Fi. I don't think Wi-Fi is
Mhm.
going to go away anywhere. It will always stay.
Yeah.
What might change is the refresh cycle of Wi-Fi, because people would want to sweat that asset for a longer time rather than wanting to upgrade it every 3 4 years.
Yeah, so we can expect Wi-Fi refreshment cycle to then align with cellular if you want. It does make sense to have a network that refreshes every 2 years and another one that stays 10 years without
Exactly.
being
Exactly.
refreshed. But I like what you were mentioning about robotics. I think that's interesting because when you're talking about robotics, we need also to talk about AI, right? At least people that cover AI talk about AI with robotics, and I think that could be an interesting way of channel AI within a private 5G market, which otherwise kind of struggles a little bit to really feed off the hype, right? You have robotics, you need to have different processing of workloads applications in different parts of your system. The old good old fashioned edge computing, wherever that happens. And I think private 5G can really play a role in that. So hopefully that sort of robotics plus AI can play a good role. And the other thing that sort of struck me. So when you were mentioning that the macro network may struggle indoor, and I think that for a lot of large enterprises that's a critical problem, because again the macro network is not designed to to cover indoor. As much as telcos love to say that they have good coverage indoor, the reality is that they don't. So
Yeah.
that's a very great opportunity for you guys.
Yeah. I mean, it starts with that, right? That regardless of what flavor of 5G you use, whether it is private 5G or network slicing or public 5G or whatever flavor you use, the first problem you have to solve is, do you have a strong signal strength inside a building? And I think there is enough data to show that majority of the buildings continue to struggle with having a strong indoor coverage. There has been, in fact, the industry has continued to use higher and higher frequencies, which makes it difficult for to penetrate the windows and the walls. The way the buildings are designed for energy efficiency and so on uses materials that makes it even more difficult for the signals to go inside. And therefore, we are at a point where there are a lot of enterprises who have concluded that they need to fund the infrastructure for indoor coverage, and that we are seeing across many verticals. Now, once you have solved that problem, then and let's say if now you have the private 5G and public 5G in place, then what becomes interesting, you were talking about AI. There are two flavors of AI that we see. One is AI for operating the networks more efficiently, and one is AI use cases that run once the network is up and running and is working well. So, from the perspective of AI use cases that are running once the network is up and running, uh, there are, we were talking about video cameras that are uploading a lot of video and then predictive maintenance happening through that. The robots that are becoming intelligent and they need a strong edge compute stack that is working alongside the robust connectivity for to make those use cases possible. So we do see those kind of use cases already running at scale in our customers. We have a healthcare customer that in Asia that is using the private network to enable their surgeons to do surgery using Microsoft HoloLenses connected to the private 5G network. That same hospital is also using robots that go around and monitor patient vitals autonomously, connected to the 5G network with no human involved at the front end. And the way you design these robotics changes, because if you have a robust connectivity layer, you don't need as much cost and compute on the device itself. You can actually have some of the cost moved to the cloud or moved to the edge compute stack and make the device even lighter weight and have a lot more of those devices. So we see some of those changes happening in certain industries. uh, and then from the second perspective, that hey, what is the role of AI in terms of running the network? It's a problem that we think about a lot, and we spend a lot of time making sure that we are doing the work that is needed for these networks to be mission critical, to be business critical, to run with high reliability. Because as I was mentioning earlier, one of the themes that is very clear is customers love private 5G when they have use cases where the cost of outage is very high, and therefore there is automatically an expectation on this network that appears to be significantly more rigorous and higher than the expectations that I had seen on Wi-Fi networks and so on. Compared to other wireless technologies, the expectation on this technology is that it simply works and never goes down, and I can run my autonomous trucks on this technology in a mine, right, as an example, right? We have a customer that runs these dozers. I think we have made public the name of that customer, Newmont Mines, that runs these autonomous dozers where every truck carries about 1,400 tons of dirt, and there is no driver in that truck.
That's a big truck.
It's a big truck, right? I mean, if imagine that truck running on a network remotely operated, and or autonomously driving, and if there is any problem with connectivity, the safety protocols in that truck say that it will apply the brakes, it will stop in a period of about 10 seconds, and then someone has to drive down the mine, go to that truck and manually inspect it before it can start again. So the cost of operation of that disconnect event happening is pretty high. It's like it runs into hundreds of thousands and in some cases millions of dollars per hour. So that's the expectation from the network. And now, in the order for that expectation to be met, AI plays a pretty critical role. So we have been investing a lot to make sure that different layers of the hardware and software stack are providing rich data that can be then analyzed through models to make sure that we can predict if something is going wrong in the network, and when something is going wrong, where is it going wrong. So I'll give you one example of this. We model standard behavior for every chipset and every device that we see around the world. And we know that if this device is working well, then this is the behavior we should see from this device, from the perspective of the control plane interaction that we have with that device, or the kind of traffic that we are supposed to see from that device, and so on. But if it deviates from that, then we can detect that this device has some issue. It's showing some abnormal behavior, which might be caused by a firmware update or something wrong happening in this device that we need to be aware of, so that that device does not cause a problem for other devices or on the network. So that's an example of using AI at scale to figure out when there is a problem in the network. Now, it can happen at any layer of the network. So one of the unique things that we have done, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about these integrated architectures versus disaggregated architectures, because there are multiple ways to build a private 5G network.
Yeah.
But our view is that in order to support these kind of use cases and these kind of expectations from the network, you have to collect rich data from the RF layer, from the RAN layer, radio software layer, the core layer, the management layer, application layer, and so on. And when you have this data, then you can take advantage of AI to figure out where a potential issue might be and avoid that potential issue in advance to make sure the network performance does not degrade. So AI RAN has a value here, the network AI has a value here, and so on. We are doing a lot of work in this area to make sure that at scale we can support the most demanding applications in the largest of the networks around the world for these enterprises who are actually starting to depend on private 5G for their mission critical production environments.
And that's great. It's fascinating, and I like the example that you gave about the mining, because I think that puts things in perspective, right? Because someone that doesn't really know too much about mines, they can, they don't understand that maybe the person needs to drive like 5 minutes to actually get to to a truck,
Mean, it's more than
or even
it is
more.
more than an hour. Is crazy. Someone has to go and manually check that truck and make sure that there is no mechanical fault in that truck before that truck is allowed to start again. This is regulation this is the safety protocols and things like that. Because 1400 tons, you can imagine how that vehicle would be in a single lane road that goes on the edge of a mine 1 kilometer deep and coming back up autonomously.
Yeah, that definitely is the type of machine that you don't want, having a problem, or
Yeah.
having to do too much work on it. No, it's yeah, I think it's good to see that the AI is filtering through, right? And a lot of what you were mentioning in terms of sort of that AI for the network, I think resonates as well from a sort of security posture, if you want. When you're looking at everything, you get data from everything. Then if something is not right, you can flag some tickets, or whatever it is. So quite exciting to see developments there. Now, if we move a little bit, sort of, you have already mentioned a few examples of deployments that you have. I'm curious whether you have any additional data point or story, lesson learned from a customer that you think is particularly relevant, and that other enterprises should really hear about. Because I think sharing these stories can really help the market, because a lot of people, again, I may be working in a different industry, but I resonate, with the same problem that you have. So any other lesson that you can share with us?
Yeah, I think at a macro level, at this point, anybody who is a prospective enterprise looking at private 5G as an option to solve a problem that they might have, they should feel confident that in the target verticals that everyone talks about, whether it is mining, oil and gas, transportation, energy, manufacturing, warehousing, verticals like these, uh, the top 15 to 20% enterprises have either already deployed private 5G or are in the process of evaluating private 5G pretty seriously to deploy it. And of course, there is a long tail beyond that. But that confidence everyone should have, that this is not an experiment, this is actually a technology that is supporting global operations in production for a lot of large enterprises across these verticals, right? So that's where the industry is right now. Now, and we had our customer advisory board a few weeks ago, and I got asked the same question. And I say that the first thing that every prospect should think about is, uh, be very, very clear on your top 3 to 5 use cases, because this is not a network that you invest in hoping that the traffic would come or the devices would come. You have to be very clear that here are the 3 problems that I have. These are business problems caused by poor connectivity. And if I had a network that could solve these 3 to 5 problems, I would have a very strong ROI in my business operations. So that could be like in manufacturing, we hear from a lot of customers that, hey, my AGVs are stopping once in a while. They have been running on Wi-Fi networks, and once in a while, I will have some problem, and the AGV will stop. And the AGV, by the way, follows the same protocol. When it stops, it beeps, and some person has to go to that AGV and manually reset it before it can start again. So we have heard some customers tell us that this event of the beep and the AGV stopping was so frequent that the manufacturing floor workers started to ignore these beeps because they were part of the life. They happen all the time on Wi-Fi networks. And then
The beauty of digital transformation, just ignored,
exactly. So and I mean, some of these customers, when they sort of went to in the direction of private 5G a few months later, when we talked to them, they said, hey, the beeps have completely disappeared, and now if it ever happens, then we actually pay attention to it because it's a rare event and it's not as common of an event as it used to be. So those kind of stories are pretty interesting to hear. So 3 to 5 use cases, be very clear on what those use cases are. In fact, when you have a conversation with a vendor, talk to them about those 3 to 5 use cases and how do you ensure with very high confidence that those 3 to 5 use cases will be successful. And then your business case will be rock solid and you will actually be happy with that investment a few months down the line. The second thing that I ask people to think about is the operational model. There are different kinds of enterprises and they like to have different kinds of operational models. So we have some enterprises that depend on a external systems integrator or a managed service provider to manage their networks. We have some others who want to do things on their own. So they would want to have a lot of tools, workflows, visibility, troubleshooting, things like that in the product itself, so that the staff that they have can solve potential issues on their own. So that's sort of the second category. And then we have different variants beyond that as well. So having clarity on the operational model and considering that in your TCO calculation and making sure you're working with a company that can support these different operational models is really important. uh, Many of these verticals are very security conscious, as you were talking about. We are talking about operations that in many enterprises that get attacked by I mean, we have customers that get attacked by state and non-state actors, and having a rock solid security stack, having a compliance approved offering is really important for these customers. So we have done a lot of work with some of these large enterprises to make sure that the architecture has undergone that scrutiny of being really secure. And if someone requires even more security, then we can go in that direction. So we have done a lot of work in the last couple of years to have flexible deployment models. We can manage networks from the cloud for customers who are okay with that. We can support local management for customers who require a little bit more security. We can even support isolated management for customers who want to completely disconnect from any kind of external environment. So we see different kinds of enterprises depending on what kind of operations they have and what scale they have, wanting different levels of security and compliance. And also the security problem, you were talking about this earlier. I see that also as a very as an emerging area for cellular networks going forward. Because what will happen is, if you think about how security got implemented on cellular in enterprises so far, majority of our cellular devices are user owned devices. They are smartphones and tablets in the last 15 years. And these devices, when they leave the building, they go outside and connect to the public networks. We have depended on mobile device management to actually secure them. Right? Every enterprise has an MDM stack, and we define the policy on that MDM stack and gets enforced on the smartphone. We are entering a world where IoT devices are going to leave the building and go outside and connect to the macro networks. These IoT devices are not going to have an MDM. So there is a new problem that is coming out on how do you ensure that enterprise policy and security stays intact for IoT devices that roam between public networks and private networks. So we have been doing a lot of work in this area to make sure that there is seamless experience, there is control in the hands of enterprise, but we can enforce the same policy and security on macro networks as well. So it requires a little bit of a tighter integration between private and public. So we are working with operators to make sure that that is possible.
And that's the interesting bit, right? Sort of the long term, sort of dream that I've always thought about it with discussing this mark is that it's not about having that only that isolated network, but it's about having that continuum. You have the private network, you have the public network, you have Wi-Fi somewhere, and it has to be continuous, has to be supporting, has to be critical, of course, secure. And when you're able to put everything sort of together, a bit of like a puzzle, then it becomes really really powerful. But since we're running out of time, the last question I have for you, if you can quickly answer in 1 or 2 minutes, which is a little bit of a follow up from what we discussed in the last 5 minutes or so. But do you have any recommendation for partners to make 2026 a successful year, for them to help growing enterprise strategy? What would you tell your partners to as a freebie before Christmas for them?
I think it depends on what role you have in the industry, right? I think we all get impacted by macroeconomic changes, and I think all of us can see that the world at the highest level is going through a lot of macroeconomic turbulence over the last year and a half, and that continues. So it's hard to predict how that would sort of settle down or continue in 2026, but that will impact everyone in the industry, how that evolves, the macroeconomic situation. Because what ends up happening as a result of that is, if you are a large enterprise or sort of an enterprise that is wanting to make a decision on whether I should invest in this network, it will depend on how that environment is progressing, right? If you're a partner trying to sell to a customer, that macroeconomic thing will impact your ability to be successful in making that sale. What I recommend to partners and folks who are in this industry is to uh, spend a lot of time upfront to make sure that the deployment has real use cases that are high ROI use cases for the customer. uh, if and they don't have to be a lot of use cases. We were talking about 3 to 5 use cases. in 100% of our deployments, when we look at those networks 1 year down the line, there are more than 3 to 5 use cases running on them. But
Okay.
it is getting clarity on the first 3 to 5 that actually lead to that strong ROI and making them successful. So we try to work with closely with our customers who do these deployments, that their first 3 to 5 use cases are absolutely successful. Because beyond that, the network is a horizontal layer, and you will always see more devices and more use cases connecting to it. But if you don't pay a lot of attention upfront on those first 3 to 5, you will end up getting stalled. As a partner, as a customer, as an internal advocate for this, you will end up getting stalled if you can't demonstrate success on the first 3 to 5 use cases. So really important to spend time on those first 3 to 5. Really important to understand the ROI of it. And I almost say that the evaluation of whether to go in the direction of private 5G or not is a little bit different than how people think about Wi-Fi networks. In Wi-Fi networks, you don't do this exercise of, hey, what are my first 3 to 5 use cases?
Yeah.
Because it is almost, I mean, it's like a cost structure for enterprise IT, right? Everyone who comes in needs some sort of connectivity, and that becomes
Yeah,
default.
you kind of need it, so you
It's
deploy it,
utility,
and
right?
that's it.
But this is not, private 5G is not like that. It has to, you have to be very clear on what your use cases are. You have to be very clear on the ROI and the business improvements you can drive if you solve those three use cases. And then once you solve it, what you will realize, guaranteed, 1 year down the line, 2 year down the line, you will have a lot more use cases running on the network. So when we look at our networks in our install base, we are seeing a significant increase across the board in the amount of uplink traffic that comes from these networks on a per site basis, in terms of number of devices that are connecting to these networks. So it is following a similar journey as Wi-Fi networks have followed for many years. But people who feel more confident about scaling from a single site to global deployments are those who have done a lot of work on their first few use cases and can make that internal justification 1 year down the line that, hey, I see strong ROI, now I need to scale globally.
Okay, amazing. So, Manish, thank you very much for your time, for your expertise. Really appreciate your thoughts on what's going to happen on 2026, and seems like an exciting year ahead. So, again, Manish, thank you very much for joining me on the Telco Drift.
Yeah, thank you, Pablo. Very good to talk to you. Thanks. Bye bye.